Good morning again, and Tanzi to our elders, our chiefs, council members, Premier Kenney, my fellow Minister Savage, and various guests and dignitaries. First, I want to thank Elder Brule for the blessing to get us off to a meaningful start here today. Thank you so much. Kanaskomtin. I'm Rick Wilson, Minister of Indigenous Relations, and I'll be your MC today. And it's an honor to be here on Treaty 6 territory in the Enoch Cree Nation. I want to thank the Grand Chief, Chief Billy Morin, for hosting us today for this important announcement on your people's land. From the beginning, our government has carried out its promise to remove barriers to economic opportunity and prosperity for Indigenous people. And it's been a promise made and a promise kept. We know that without concrete actions, reconciliation is an empty word. Symbolic gestures will not bridge Indigenous people into Alberta's economy. We're working with Indigenous leaders and communities to lead and create a path to a stronger Alberta from which we all can benefit. And that's why we're here. We created the first of its kind, the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, to bring in the First People as true partners in prosperity. We developed a litigation fund to help Indigenous-led action challenge against federal legislation that hinders major energy projects. And we just announced the re-engagement of the Aboriginal Business Investment Fund. We call it ABIF. It's to support investment in Indigenous community-owned businesses that strengthen local economies and create jobs and new revenue streams. So now I'd like to invite our Premier Jason Kenney to come forward and to make today's announcement. Premier.
All right. Thanks, Chief. Tansi, thank you very much, Minister Wilson, and most importantly, thanks to the Enoch Cree First Nation, Grand Chief Billy Morin, for welcoming us onto your lands here. It's also great to be here with leaders from Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation and the Indian Resources Council, as well as many folks from the oil and gas industry. And isn't it great to see a pump jack operating right now, right here on this land, creating wealth for this nation as well as for the people of Alberta. I'd also like to thank Enoch Chief Elder Chief Jim Brule for the prayer that he welcomed us with. Oil was discovered here on the Enoch lands back in 1947, the same year that Leduc No. 1 came in from the same Devonian reefs just a few miles south of here. And Alberta's modern oil industry was born partly on this land. The wealth that poured out of the earth here fueled the development of the Enoch First Nation into the modern, prosperous, and economically diversified community that it is today. And that it is becoming even more so under Chief Morin's leadership. Enoch's story is Alberta's story. Together, we used our energy and other natural resources to create jobs and prosperity for all our people and millions who have joined us from across Canada and around the world. For decades, our oil and gas industry has been the dynamic engine of not just Alberta, but Canada's economy, generating jobs, investment, and growth from coast to coast, and producing tax revenues that build schools, hospitals, and roads in every part of our country. There have been ups and downs, booms and busts, but together we've weathered every market downturn and economic challenge and overcome every political challenge. Today, however, we are facing perhaps our toughest challenges ever. 2020 began pretty positive. After 5 years of economic stagnation, due in part to hostile policy decisions, we were finally starting to see energy sector prices, shipments, investment, jobs, and confidence coming back. Then COVID-19 hit, triggering the global recession and the biggest oil price crash in history, the latter made worse by a surge of supply from OPEC dictatorships to try to drive North America out of the energy business. The economic impact for Alberta and Canada of all of this has been just devastating. Energy is the single largest sector of Canada's economy, making up about a quarter of our country's exports and about 500,000 jobs, contributing nearly $1 trillion to Canada's GDP over the last 15 years alone. $1 trillion, as it happens, is also the estimated size of the national debt now because of all the money borrowed to spend to fight the pandemic. Now, obviously, we need our economy firing on all cylinders to get out of the deep fiscal hole that we're in and to get Canada working again. Obstruction of pipelines and energy projects is not an option for any government that is serious about economic recovery, about getting folks back to work, generating tax revenues needed to pay for social programs like healthcare, let alone interest on the trillions of dollars of debt that we're racking up. That's why Alberta's recovery plan takes bold action to create jobs, build infrastructure, and diversify Alberta's economy by building on our strengths, including our oil and gas sector. Now, during good times, First Nations companies have made billions of dollars selling goods and services to the oil and gas industry in areas like trucking, catering, construction, and so much more. As Chief Desjardins of the Frog Lake First Nation has said, over the last 20 years, Indigenous-owned companies have earned far more income doing business with oil sands company than they ever got from the government in Ottawa. In 2018 alone, the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association members collectively bought, get this, $240 million, $250 million of goods and services from Indigenous suppliers alone. And I think the sky is the limit on that. When the oil patch is down, when the new pipelines don't get built, when our energy is landlocked, First Nations suffer. So if Canada truly cares about working with Indigenous Canadians to move from economic exclusion and too often poverty to economic inclusion and prosperity, then we need to go all in as partners in the development of our energy resources in a responsible way. Chief Desjardins also said this, that, quotes, ensuring the industry is supported will be one of the most important strategies for boosting Indigenous economies in the aftermath of the pandemic, quote, unquote. So I know my friends here, Grand Chief Morin, Chief Alexis, Stephen Buffalo, we're on exactly the same page, as are the vast majority of First Nations in our province who recognize oil and gas as a key to prosperity. The Alberta government gets it. We got elected last year with a record mandate to partner with First Nations in getting pipelines built and getting investment and growth back in the energy sector. Part of this partnering is in the effort to make Canada the most competitive energy producer on earth by ensuring that our industry maintains the world's highest environmental, social, and governance standards. That's why we went to Ottawa when the pandemic hit, with a proposal to turn the oil patch crisis into an environmental and job-creating opportunity. Basically, our pitch was this: let's put laid-off energy workers and idle companies back to work right now by taking one of the biggest oil patch site rehabilitation projects forward in the history of Canada. And to Ottawa's credit, a phrase I don't use very often, but to Ottawa's credit, they bought the idea and our billion-dollar site rehabilitation program was born. The SRP site rehabilitation project provides grants to eligible oil field service contractors to perform well pipeline and oil and gas closure and reclamation work. A lot of that work needs to be done on First Nations lands, and a lot of it can and must be done by First Nations contractors. And I want to thank Stephen Buffalo and the Indian Resource Council's chair, Chief Roy Fox, for reminding me of that fact just about daily. That's why I'm very pleased to announce several measures today that will increase and strengthen Indigenous participation in this historic effort to clean up old wells and other orphaned oil field infrastructure. Our announcement today is at one of those well sites here on Enoch land. And the company that will do the cleanup is Backwoods Energy Services, an oil field service outfit owned by Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation. So thank you, Chief Alexis, for your vision and leadership in creating opportunity for your people. This is a great example of two First Nations working together to get their people employed on a project that creates jobs, benefits the local environment on First Nations land, and strengthens our environmental performance so we can attract future investment to create more jobs in oil and gas. It's a virtuous cycle. I love it. Now, the Backwoods Energy Services has been approved to clean up 56 sites here at Enoch, and another Indigenous-owned company, Western Petroleum Management, has also recently been approved to tackle a big amount of work. This is great news, but I assure you it is just the beginning. The SRP, this program, is being rolled out incrementally in $100 million increments, and we did that in part to ensure that First Nations contractors and smaller contractors, not just the big guys, get to benefit from the program. From the start, we sought First Nations input in the design of this program, and now those efforts are turning into jobs and contracts. To further strengthen Indigenous participation, we've established a working group co-chaired by the IRC, the Indian Resource Council, to facilitate relationships between oil field contractors and Indigenous communities with orphaned oil and gas sites on their lands and surrounding areas. The working group will help to build connections like the one right here between Backwoods and Enoch Cree, and will also help increase the number of Indigenous companies and who participate in and benefit from this program. We've also set up an industry advisory committee comprised of representatives from Alberta's oil and gas sector to advise us on improving and streamlining the program to make sure that funding gets out the door and gets people working as quick as possible. So Energy Minister Sonya Savage has appointed an Indigenous liaison to further boost First Nations participation in the program. As a result of these efforts, I'm confident that we'll see many more Indigenous companies and employees getting back to work, and many more sites getting cleaned up across Alberta, including those on First Nations and Métis settlements. The actions we're announcing today are really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of future opportunities in the energy sector for Indigenous companies, workers, and communities. Make no mistake, Alberta's government is 100% committed to ensuring that First Nations and their companies play a meaningful role in Alberta's future prosperity, including sharing fully in future growth of the sector. A big part of the inspiration for the new path we're on is former Treaty 6 Grand Chief Willie Littlechild, who served as one of the commissioners with the National Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He describes our shared goal as reconciliation, and I couldn't agree more. In fact, I just got a text from Willie yesterday saying, we got to work together to make sure people benefit from a future in the energy sector. Since Alberta's government was elected just 15 months ago, our approach to reconciliation has included convening the First Nations Summit a year ago, the first all-chiefs meeting with Alberta's Premier and Cabinet in 5 years. We renewed protocol agreements with the Blackfoot Confederacy last year and are planning a new agreement with the Stoney Nakoda Tsuut'ina Tribal Council in the near future. We established the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, backstopped by $1 billion of the faith and credit of the Alberta government to facilitate First Nations investment and co-ownership of major resource projects. And I made the announcement that we were going to create that right here at the River Cree Hotel with Chief Morin in March of last year. And I think we've got some exciting news coming up on that, Rick. Are going to roll out some announcements. And we created the Indigenous Litigation Fund, as mentioned, that is supporting the defense of Indigenous economic rights. Partnering in the site rehabilitation program, getting First Nations companies and employees working, cleaning up the environment, strengthening Canada's long-term prospects. There are so many wins here, it's hard to count them all. Thanks to everyone who's partnering with us in this historic venture. And particularly, I want to thank Grand Chief for Treaty 6, Billy Morin, for his vision and leadership. He called me about 6 weeks ago, said we need to get out here and highlight this project and the work that you are doing. I want to thank him as well and his nation for the support for the TMX pipeline, which I think will be, you can give us an update, but I believe they'll be crossing your reserve land fairly soon here. And I just want to thank you, Chief, you and your colleagues for your leadership, and it's great to work together for the benefit of your people and all Albertans. Over to you, sir.
Nigan na naskama kotawin na simantu ogamao pisem anoska gisagak miwasin wapi kio net sigasan maskesi o chinia katamska tanoa gakiao na waku maganak nanaskama nimosamokimao Jim for the prayer. Egwa acknowledge our nation, but in particularly the Alexander family, who this is their homestead, this is their land. I acknowledge them as well. The first thing I'll say is 1951, the Premier acknowledged 1947. As soon as that, they were exploring for oil and gas here in the nation. But in particular, in 1951, in this site, this is our oldest production site. And in 1951, 69 years ago, Chief Billy Morin was standing right here. And he was standing here with his fellow leadership and his nation members talking about the prosperity coming from that well site. And it's just an honor to continue my great-grandfather's work and the road they established to prosperity for our First Nation here as well. And they couldn't do it alone. Back then, they had great partnerships with industry and great partnerships with government. And again, it's just good today to continue on the path that my grandfathers and the leaders before us came to do. I want to acknowledge the unique partnership that we're standing in front of today. It's not easy to get two First Nations or multiple First Nations, their energy company, who's doing fabulous work to the tune of over $100 million in this area in a downturn economy. Two ministries, a premier, our leaseholder, Mega Energy, and multiple other stakeholders that it takes to do this work. So this is one of the most unique partnerships that you'll ever see. And I thank the province for doing it in such a timely fashion. When I lobbied the province, they were readily available to make sure that this work gets done for our First Nation in this time of need during COVID. So this province, I thank them very much for doing work at the speed of business for First Nations, very much so. The Premier spoke again, and I thank Minister Savage for committing her ministry to the SRC program and rolling it out again in such a quick manner and including First Nations as well. Their commitment to First Nations has been, in this regard, I would say unprecedented from any government. There is no record that I know of where it's a federal government or provincial government or any external investment to the responsibility of cleaning up these wells. And it's just a proud day to do honor by these wells, Mother Earth, and our ancestors who came before us who started this work. The work itself is going to be done by Backwoods. I'm very proud to say that that company is owned by the Alexis Nakota Sioux, our brothers and sisters here in Treaty 6. And we couldn't think of a better partnership to establish to do this work. Backwoods has proven itself time and time again over the last number of years, growing exponentially in the oil and gas sector, our bread and butter in Alberta. And again, Chief Alexis, my brother at Treaty 6, he's here to help us and help our nation and help create employment for our members right here on the nation for us. So thank you, Chief Alexis. So this is just the beginning and a new chapter for these well sites. But sometimes the more things change, the more they stay the same. And we're not done with oil and gas. The Premier acknowledged that pump jack right there that's pumping, and we were just meeting with our leaseholder, Mega Energy. And the conversation turned really good into something, what's the actual possible future to keep this industry going? Because it's not dead. It's not dead. It's got a bright future ahead of it with new technology, new jobs, new opportunities for young people in multiple sectors, whether that be in extraction or whether that be in pipelines or whether that be in logistics or whether that be in future technology for the young people who want to take up IT. So I acknowledge our leaseholder, Mega Energy, as well. So returning these particular sites to its natural state is truly just an honor for me to keep up my grandfather's work, the first Chief Billy Morin. This is just another door into the next chapter of our partnerships with the provincial government, with our industry partners. But our work's not done. I acknowledge Stephen Buffalo from IRC and the work we still have to do in conjunction with the provincial government to lobby the federal government and Indian Oil and Gas to keep this work going. The province committed to this work for First Nations. Now we need the federal government to step up in that regard as well, more so, because over the last 40 or 60 years, this has been their work on this file has been negligent. But this is a start, and I'm proud to stand here with the provincial government, industry, and IRC that we can finally say we're getting going to a level that has never been done before. Now we have to lobby the federal government for more money and more resources to get this work done, which ultimately they have a big role to play in responsibility of getting these well sites cleaned up. The last thing I'll say is that, again, how truly proud I am in this regard to stand here. There is an economic downturn right now. There is vast amounts of challenges ahead of us as Treaty 6, as Nehiyao, as Enoch Cree Nation members, as Albertans and Canadians. But as the Premier said in Chief Willie Littlechild's words, reconciliation today is an action towards prosperity and jobs. We're wearing the masks from Good Fish. Another action, as small as it could be, is an action, an actual move towards creating jobs for these masks that we're wearing. This is an action to still uphold the work that my grandfathers did, the former chiefs, in this industry. And now we're doing right by Mother Earth to clean it up and move it into its next chapter of advanced technology and pipelines and moving it forward to create jobs and prosperity for the next 7 generations. So, hi, kinanaskum tanwao, and thank you for coming today.
First, I want to thank the Premier for being here today and your remarks. It's such an honor to be here, and when you can see like some of the work that the Backwoods has done here, just an amazing stage. I think we'll use this place all the time. This is amazing. And thank you, Chief Morin. Thank you also for your friendship. The Chief has become a great friend of mine. His wife actually made me this beautiful pendant. It's just been an honor to work with you and get to know you even better. Now I'm going to go to my next colleague, probably the busiest cabinet minister that I know, the Minister of Energy, Sonya Savage. She's going to make some remarks for us. So, Sonya, since I never get to see you, you're so busy, please give us some remarks here.
Well, thank you, Minister, and thank you, Premier. I'm extremely honored to be here today alongside Chief Morin and Chief Alexis to highlight some of the important work that is happening through the Site Rehabilitation Program, the SRP. So it's wonderful after countless hours and days and weeks putting the program together to see work actually starting. The program itself was developed and launched in less than 2 weeks from the day that the federal government announced $1 billion in funding. We opened up an online application process very quickly, and we've seen a tremendous response in application period 1. So I'll give you a little bit of a highlight and a bit of an update on the SRP program. Now, it's taken some time to get through a large number of applications, but I'm very pleased to report that to date, more than $69 million in funding has already been allocated to 140 Alberta-based companies. This will get oilfield service companies like Backwoods Energy Services here back in the field, working, cleaning up oil and gas sites right across the province. And this is just the very beginning of a long program. There is more than $900 million left to be allocated. We know that there are very difficult economic circumstances, and we know in that time how important it is to get Albertans back to work. Without this program, an essential component of our economic recovery plan, many of these companies would be left without work. I'm especially pleased to see work going to Backwoods Energy Services, which is 100% Indigenous owned, the largest employer of the Alexis Band members, and the largest independent source of income in that community. Backwoods and other companies like it right across the province will receive more grants as we continue to implement the program with greater efficiencies and improvements with each application period. And as the Premier noted at the very outset of the program, we decided to launch it in $100 million increments. This was done purposely to provide us with room to adjust as we move forward, to learn where improvements could be made, and to make sure that the program was accomplishing its objectives. We set up an industry advisory committee and an Indigenous roundtable to help. I would like to acknowledge members here today and thank them for their input and the recommendations and the expertise. And a huge thank you to Stephen Buffalo of the Indian Resource Council and the work from the IRC. And I'd also like to give a huge thank you to Elizabeth Aiken of PSAC, who is here today and has helped us with recommendations to design the program and each phase of the program better. And with the valuable feedback from these committees, we are now putting mechanisms in place to make it quicker and easier for oilfield service companies to apply for a grant and receive funding and get back to work. We're able to do this without losing the program's necessary rigor and oversight. Oversight that is needed to make sure that taxpayer dollars are used responsibly and that the program meets its objectives. Many of these recommendations will apply to application period 3. Which I'm very pleased to announce will open to online applications on this Friday. In period 3, we are allocating up to $139,000 in funding to each of Alberta's oil and gas company well site operators, also called the licensees. This is different from phase 1, where funding was limited to $30,000 grants per contract. The advisory committee told us that the limits in phase 1 made planning sequential work very difficult. So we're making improvements. As with previous application periods, the grants in period 3 will go directly to oilfield service companies doing the work. Following the advice from the advisory committees, we will also be reassessing applications that were declined in periods 1 and 2 because of administrative errors. We will deploy the remaining funds from those periods for this. We felt that this reassessment had to occur to be fair to contractors who put in time and effort to submit their applications and contracts on a very rushed basis. We've heard stories of some spending 18 hours a day to put their applications together. They were submitted on a rushed basis, and some were declined because of administrative errors. These companies won't have to reapply. We'll reassess their applications, taking into consideration certain administrative errors. In addition, we also just posted the list of sites that have been nominated so far by landowners and Indigenous and Métis communities. Many of these sites are on First Nation reserves or Métis settlements. This site nomination process will enable Indigenous communities and landowners to identify sites that they want prioritized for cleanup under this program. Future application periods with larger contract limits will be launched in the coming weeks and months. This will include an application period that looks at larger area-based closure programs, which did not fit into the guidelines in period 1. I know that there are companies that are disappointed that they were not approved in the first 2 periods or were not given as much work as they had hoped for during those periods, but there's still lots of work and lots of opportunity with over $900 million in funding left to distribute. We encourage these companies to apply in future rounds and in future periods. I also want to note that the input we have received from the industry advisory committees and the Indigenous Roundtable will help us as we implement our overall liability management framework, which will be released shortly. This framework will allow us to address the full life cycle of oil and gas development and ensure that the right conditions exist for industry to pay for their closure obligations as we move forward. In conclusion, we'll continue to work together to implement the site rehabilitation program, keeping energy service companies going until we can turn the corner and relaunch our energy sector. Doing all of this while meeting Alberta's commitment to responsible resource development. And I especially want to thank you for the opportunity, Chief, to meet here and to see your lands, see these sites, and have an opportunity to talk about the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister Savage. What an amazing job. She put that together with her team in just days. I was just amazed at how you did, and she's such a big heart for the Indigenous people. And with encouragement from the Premier, we've we've been able to establish a concierge service. If you go online, you can find that and hit on the concierge service. So if some of the First Nations don't have the ability to access the things they need, they can go online, and we'll help you through the system to get involved in this. I just want to invite Stephen Buffalo now. He's the President and CEO of the Indian Resource Council, Vice Chair of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, to give us a few words. Stephen.
Humano tamtek ninote na skamana kapix kwestamagia. Kapisaga witness siga sud maskuchi siknip sika ojitnia. Nanaskamane pe toteg ota maskeko sik. I first of all want to thank our elder for our prayer today. I want to acknowledge the Premier for your great leadership, and as well Minister Savage and Minister Napel, Rick Wilson, and thank the chiefs, Chief Billy and Chief Tony, for this event today. I'm very happy today. Thank Premier for including us in this important, timely event. I recognize the chiefs and congratulate Chief Morin, Chief Alexis, for their leadership in supporting and promoting First Nation business. This is a great example of collaboration between Indigenous people and the government of Alberta. And I truly thank the Premier for his leadership in supporting initiatives such as this one. As we know, the COVID crisis has hit us all hard. And for us, our workers are typically last to be hired, first to be fired in a downturn such as this. And our contractors from our nations are treated similarly. Furthermore, our royalties have plummeted at the same time as to the cost of the deal of the COVID ramping up. So this is a timely initiative for us to help recover somewhat. And the Indian Resource Council wishes to thank the Alberta government for recognizing the importance of putting Albertans back to work, and specifically our communities and our contractors. The Indian Resource Council is working with oil and gas producers, CAP, EPAC, CAODC, and the government of Alberta on a program to collaboratively address over 2,000 inactive wells on First Nation reserve here in Alberta. And we're finalizing a submission, and will be on your desk, Premier, hopefully by August. You know
how to get a hold of me, Steve.
Yes. Our program will build on great examples such as announcements, the federal and provincial government to commit $1 billion to address inactive wells in Alberta. We will be asking the government to set aside a portion of funding for Indigenous peoples and their contractors. And we look forward to working further with the government of Alberta on this and other future initiatives. The Indian Resource Council has been advocating for responsible First Nation energy development since the early 80s. This site rehabilitation program is a great first step in this direction. In closing, a couple of points I'd like to make. Today I brought my son and his girlfriend, who are graduates of our alma mater, the College of Notre Dame in Saskatchewan. You know, and my son's aggressive, and he's wearing a Calgary Flames hat here in Oiler country. But the importance of them being here and seeing this and witnessing this, you know, his grandfather, former Chief Victor Buffalo, fought for our rights, fought for a better play in the oil and gas sector. And he knew, you know, we had our challenges in First Nations in dealing oil and gas. And our people had learned the hard way with industry and government. But today, you're seeing this government take great strides forward for them, for their future, as they're witnessing a well that's been here for years. This road is, my friend Shane told me, that's why this road's crooked, because of this well. It's been here for years. And they're witnessing this relationship with the government and Indigenous people to now take action and to clean the land. Because it's them we're going to leave. We're leaving is the land. And I'm very, very thankful that they're here today. And I'd also like to thank the Premier for inviting us to witness this milestone. I remain optimistic our role will help Alberta and Canada recover from the current crisis. And I want to thank you, Mr. Premier, for your dedication and commitment to see Indigenous people and their businesses succeed. You know, as we continue to work together, I just have to give one shout out to the Indigenous Resource Network. It's online, have a look at it, and we're investigating how we can work collaboratively with them as well. So with that, I want to say thank you to everyone for coming today. I want to thank the Premier and both ministers. Thank you very much. And Chief Billy and Chief Alexis, thank you.
Good job. Thanks, Steve. What's your son's name again?
I just got to mention these nice face masks from Goodfish. It actually created quite a business for them. They had to hire, I think it was 20 extra people to sew all these face masks. And I think if you go onto Goodfish website, you can find out how to get one yourself. Had to put a little plug in for them there. Thank you, Stephen, and the IRC. You've been a great partner to this government. So, how many Notre Dame hounds are here? Even my press secretary is a Notre Dame hound. Look at all these guys. That's awesome. The Premier threw a few elbows in his day. We're going to get the Premier one of these with a hound on it. So, to close, I'd like to recognize some of the participants who are also here in support of the announcement today. Chief Tony Alexis, a great chief from the Alexis Nakota Sioux First Nation. Thank you so much. They put together this whole stage here. It's amazing. They make these rig mats just over in Atchison Park, I think, isn't it? Yeah. So they're making these rig mats. They're using them all along the pipeline and their equipment, and you're doing a great job. Yeah. I also want to acknowledge Elizabeth Akwin, Senior Vice President of PSAC. And I just want to thank everybody for being here with us today as we commemorate the start of this important work. Just to close, I want to reiterate the importance of the Indigenous people and the government working closely. We've developed such a great relationship, and I just want to see it improve and help the Indigenous people be partners in prosperity with us here. Alberta's not going to move forward without Indigenous people in Alberta. Working alongside our First Nations and Métis family is vital to reestablishing a thriving Alberta. So thank you everyone for being here, and I believe we've got time for a few questions. So.
Okay, we'll get the Q&A started. I'll remind those on the phone to let us know who you were addressing your question to. Operator, can you please put through the first caller?
Our first question comes from David Staples of the Edmonton Journal. Your line is open.
Hi, Chief. How are you doing today? I have a question about just your relations with Alberta government, conservative governments in the past as compared to now. How, in terms of the openness of this conservative government as compared to previous conservative governments, how open is this government to working with First Nations on oil and gas projects? And a follow-up question is, in terms of TMX, what kind of progress is being made in terms of a stake in First Nations ownership in TMX?
Thank you for your question, David. This current Conservative government gets it. I would say this current Conservative government is working in relation to First Nations business and partnership at the speed of business. That is a common language for us. That is a black and white language, and that's a language that we can move forward together when it comes to rebuilding the economy. I spoke about that in a recent journal article, that our common language is economy. So they get it, we get it, and I'm pretty proud to say that it's, since my time in leadership, their investment, their partnership, and the speed they move at when it comes to economic development has been just awesome. The second question when it comes to TMX is that discussions are currently moving forward with ultimately Indigenous ownership in that project. And I think you'll see in the coming months some announcements in terms of Treaty 6 and Alberta nations driving that bus to ultimately possibly owning that project. Thank you.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Emma Graney of the Globe and Mail. Your line is open.
Yeah, g'day. I have a couple of questions. The first one is for Grand Chief Morin. You mentioned there that you'd like to see the federal government kick in more money for the well cleanup program. I'm curious how you balance that call with the polluter pays principle that is supposed to obviously be a governing part of the whole energy sector. And then further to that question, and this is either for Minister Savage or Premier Kenney, have the federal government even given over the full $1 billion yet? Because I seem to remember that you guys had to make some regulatory changes around well liabilities before they were going to give you that money. So they are my two questions. Thank you.
If you could just reiterate, the first question was a comment towards balancing oil and gas development and the word pollution with investment in cleaning up.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
You called then for more federal government money for cleaning up wells and that kind of thing, and said they've been negligent over the past few years. But I'm curious as to how giving more government money also fits in with this idea that oil and gas companies should be cleaning up their own messes.
Well, it's a unique position for First Nations. We are under the jurisdiction of the federal government through Indian Oil and Gas. They have a fiduciary responsibility to our oil and gas sector on reserve lands, and they have been negligent for the better part of 60 years. And the commitments they've made to clean up these sites, to do right by us when it comes to royalties. So we do call on the federal government to do their fiduciary duty. We have a government here that has a new program and $1 billion to clean up, and they're the only government at the table right now making the commitment to First Nations, so I find that a little odd. So, when it comes to pollution and development, I think there is a balance to be struck when it comes to development, but also cleaning up the land, and we need the federal government to step up in that regard because they haven't for 60 years.
Hello, Emma. It's Minister Savage here. I can step in and answer a little bit on both questions. First, with respect to the contract with the federal government for the turnover of the $1 billion funds, we're still working on that. These things take some time. There's some contractual clauses and some unique language. These things take time, so we're still waiting for the funds to be transferred over. But we're not waiting for those funds to get people back to work. We've already rolled out $69 million in contracts, and we'll be aggressively and quickly rolling out hundreds of millions more. So. One other quick comment with respect to the polluter pay principle. One of the things we're doing in this contract is we are, in this program, is the money goes to oilfield service companies, not to the licensees. And that's in part because of the polluter pay principle. But just as importantly, this is also a job creation program. We have a jobs crisis here in Alberta. And so in a lot of cases, nothing would be cleaned up without the funding from this program. It is a job creation program to create jobs in every corner of the province, with the added benefit that it's also an environmental program that will see environmental results in cleaning up these sites.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next question comes from Shuri Nareen of Windspeaker. Your line is open.
Thank you. This question is for Energy Minister Savage. Will the province be willing to set aside a percentage of that $1 billion budget for the well site cleanup specifically for Indigenous contractors?
Thank you, and we're doing a lot of measures to make sure that Indigenous contractors get a lot of work from this. We've included an Indigenous roundtable for exactly that, and we also have a site nomination process for every single site that is on Indigenous lands to be prioritized. We're working with Indigenous groups to make sure that they have the capacity to be involved in the program. One of the things we heard early on was that for some of these companies, and it wouldn't be Backwoods Energy because they're very, very well adapted and sophisticated and experienced on it, but there are a lot of companies out there, Indigenous companies, that maybe don't have that degree of experience, and we're worried that they could miss out on the opportunity because they have to generate the capacity. We're working with them on that. We've already rolled out of the $69 million dollars of funds. It's about $6 million has been to Indigenous service companies, and all of that is before we've even taken a look at the site nominations. So we're very confident that this is going to deliver a lot of services and a lot of value for Indigenous companies. And one of the measures by which we'll assess the success of this program is how much goes to Indigenous contractors.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Shannon Scott at CBC. Your line is open.
Oh, hi. This is a question for the Premier. Mr. Premier, I know that my French colleagues would appreciate it if you could answer this question in English and in French. We're wondering about your reaction to the Buffalo Project letter that was released today, and if you think that maybe these are people trying to tell you that you aren't acting quickly enough on the Fair Deal Panel recommendations.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. It's very windy here. Hard to hear the questions. So I think the question was about a Buffalo Project letter. Got my Buffalo right here. Thank you very much, Stephen Buffalo, for this. So I haven't had a chance to read that yet. I will hopefully do so later today. We welcome a debate about how Alberta can be stronger economically, stronger in the Canadian Federation. And I know there's a lot of different groups and individuals with ideas. We welcome that debate. It's why we set up the Fair Deal Panel, partly to generate that debate within our province. There is a great deal of frustration in this province, and rightfully so. A frustration about a series of policies that have sought to landlock our greatest natural resource, which is worth trillions of dollars, and policies that have killed tens of thousands of jobs and thousands of businesses, and have also helped to contribute to even a pre-COVID fiscal crisis in Alberta. So I think they're right to be raising these issues. As you know, I issued the Alberta government response to the Fair Deal Panel recommendations a few weeks ago, and we accepted, I think, 24 of the 26 recommendations, and we are moving forward. We're moving forward with a detailed and rigorous study of the possible benefits of our own Alberta pension plan, because we have the youngest population in the country. The math is that we could reduce premiums or increase benefits by $3 billion a year if we were to establish our own pension like Quebec has done. We're also doing a deep technical study on the costs and benefits of a potential reestablishing a potential Alberta provincial police force. And we do want to discuss that with Indigenous communities as well, because of their obvious concerns about policing, most recently highlighted by what happened up at Fort McMurray last month, involving the chief of Fort Chippewa First Nation. So those are issues where we want to see if we can improve policing for all Albertans, including Indigenous Albertans, by doing what Quebec, Ontario, and Newfoundland and Labrador have, which is provincial police services. We've committed to a referendum on equalization to demand fiscal fairness in the Federation, and so much more. So we'll continue to take action on that. I appreciate input from all different perspectives, and I'll offer the same answer in French. Je n'ai pas eu l'occasion à lire la lettre du projet Buffalo, mais évidemment, nous accueillons les idées différentes en ce qui concerne une stratégie pour renforcer la force de l'Alberta dans la Fédération canadienne. Évidemment, c'est la raison pour laquelle j'ai nommé le groupe de Fair Deal Panel, qui est le gouvernement de l'Alberta a accepté, je crois, 24 de 26 recommandations de ce groupe-là, et nous faisons le travail acharné en ce qui concerne le potentiel pension albertain, parce qu'avec notre population plus jeune, nous aurons pu réduire les taxes pour les pensions ou améliorer, augmenter les paiements de pension. Nous étudions de près la possibilité d'une force policière de l'Alberta comme l'Ontario, le Québec et le Terre-Neuve, avec la consultation avec les Autochtones, les Premières Nations et les autres enjeux. Nous prenons l'action pour renforcer la justice pour les Albertains dans la Fédération canadienne.
Okay, we have time for 3 more. Operator, can you put through the next caller, please?
Our next question comes from Jason Herring of the Calgary Herald. Your line is open.
Hello, this is a question for the Premier. Premier Kenney, the CBC this morning reported on the hiring of your former campaign manager, John Weissenberger, to the Alberta Energy Regulator in a vice president position. The NDP opposition is calling the hiring another example of UCP cronyism, and they say it will erode public trust in the AER due to past writings by Weissenberger denying man-made global warming. How would you respond to those assertions?
As most things we hear from the NDP, the assertions are false. Dr. Weissenberger is one of the most highly regarded geologists in the Canadian energy sector with a PhD in geology. He's a scientist. He's an adjunct professor at the University of Alberta. I understand that he applied as part of an open competition and was selected by the Alberta Energy Regulator in a completely independent way. He was not appointed by the government. In fact, I didn't even know that he had applied in my office, and the government had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with, Dr. Weissenberger is a free citizen. He is a highly qualified scientist. He has every right to apply for a position for which he is qualified, and the regulator has every right to choose the best qualified person. I think it's great that they've selected one of the most highly regarded scientists in the Alberta energy sector for a position such as that. But again, that was handled in a completely independent fashion. I just learned about this a few days ago. Not even Dr. Weissenberger told me he had applied.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Jesse Weisner of Global TV. Your line is open.
Hi, this question is for Premier Kenney. The Alberta Medical Association made its latest offer to the government public this morning. Doctors say they've submitted 3 proposals this year alone, and you've said that they haven't come to the table. Where's the disconnect here?
Well, I haven't seen that. I'd be happy to get briefed on it by Health Minister Shandro. The disconnect is that we have not seen a credible proposal. I'm not sure about today's, but until now, we have not seen a credible proposal that meets the imperative of stopping massive increases in physician compensation. We value our physicians. They obviously play a critical role in our healthcare system and must in the future. We value them so much that we believe they not only should be compensated fairly, but even generously. We value them so much that Alberta compensates our physicians better than any other province in Canada by a country mile. According to the Canadian Institute for Health Information, the Ernst & Young Performance Review of Alberta Health Services, and Dr. Janice McKinnon's Blue Ribbon Panel on Alberta's finances, Alberta physicians on average receive about 20% more compensation than their counterparts across the country, about $107,000 more in gross billings per physician, higher than is the case in Ontario, for example. And that's fine. But what we cannot continue to see is massive annual increases in physician compensation, which represents 10% of the expenditures of Alberta's government, particularly at a time of a fiscal and economic crisis. For the past several years, nurses and other healthcare workers have been frozen at zero. The average private sector family has seen their income decline by 10%. But over the same period, physicians have seen their compensation in total go up by 23%, by 6% a year, faster than the growth in inflation and population. It's simply not sustainable. Alberta today has a $300 billion economy. 5 years ago, we had a $365 billion economy. So while we've seen, over the same period that we've seen a roughly 20% reduction in the size of Alberta's economy, a 10% reduction in after-tax incomes for private sector families, we have seen a 23% increase in compensation for some of the wealthiest people in our province. They deserve to be compensated fairly and generously, but we have to come to an agreement where we don't see these constant annual increases, and we have not yet received a proposal from the AMA that would achieve that essential objective for fairness, because we all have to be in this together. We can't ask nurses and public sector workers to continue to take zeros. We can't ask people in the private sector who are hundreds of thousands of whom are unemployed today with no incomes, who are losing their homes. We can't ask them to pay more for the most highly paid people in the public sector year after year after year when they're already the best paid in their category in the country.
Okay, we have time for one more. Operator, could you please put through the last caller?
Our final question comes from Audrey Nouveau of Radio Canada. Your line is open.
Hi, my question is for the Premier. Premier, if you could answer in both English and French, that would be much appreciated. Of Labor of Alberta are both calling on the federal, on the Alberta government to make masks mandatory in workplaces and enclosed public spaces. What is your answer to their call?
Sure. I believe in the importance of wearing masks to help us to contain the COVID pandemic. In fact, I was ahead of the Public Health Agency of Canada in that regard. Back when the World Health Organization and the Public Health Agency of Canada were saying that we're basically discouraging widespread mask use, I was encouraging it. And not just encouraging it rhetorically, but practically, which is why Alberta's government has provided 40 million free masks to Albertans to make it easier for them to get those masks, but also to make a point that to normalize mask use in situations where people cannot physically distance from others. So having said that, I agree with what Dr. Hinshaw said from the beginning, which is that we can't enforce our way out of the pandemic. I think that encouragement, making masks available, public education is the more successful route. And I just see all sorts of problems if we were to seek to enforce mandatory masks as a legal obligation. Some municipalities are considering it in areas like transit, and if they do so, that's entirely their decision. I guess what I would say to people is this: if we want to do everything we can to avoid widespread disruption of economic and social activity in the future if we get a significant second wave. And so one way we can maximize our freedom is through the personal responsibility of using face coverings and masks when we cannot physically distance. So I urge Albertans, if they're in grocery stores, on mass transit, in close proximity to others in workplaces, please be considerate. Using a mask is not a sign. I see on Facebook some people think it's a sign of subjugation or fear. No, it's not. It's a sign of consideration for others. The mask doesn't actually substantially reduce your chances of getting infected, but it does reduce the chances of you unwittingly infecting someone else if you happen to be an asymptomatic carrier of the COVID-19 virus. So that's why I think it's important. It's why we've made 40 million available. We're the only government in Canada to do it. But I think our Alberta approach is the responsible use of freedom rather than government micromanagement of people's lives.